For the degree of hydration lab, you are going to need a few key materials to make sure that you do the lab correctly and safely. For the experiment, you will need a glass stir rod, a crucible, goggles to protect your eyes, gloves to protect your hands from the heat of the hot plate, the copper 2 sulfate, and the hot plate to heat the crucible. The next thing that you need to do is mask the empty crucible. To do this, you must first take the electronic scale, zero it by pressing the 0 button, then take the crucible, put it on the scale, and wait for the numbers to stop fluctuating. As soon as you have that, record the number to the nearest 100th. The next thing you need to do is place the crucible on top of the scale, then with the crucible on top, press the 0 button. That way, you can accurately put in 5 grams of the copper 2 sulfate. Next, gently place the chips of copper 2 sulfate into the crucible while it is on the scale. Do this slowly so that you can accurately read the scale, so that way you know when to stop when it hits 5 grams. Next, you need to plug in the hot plate into an outlet on the desk. Then you have to read the display. If it is flashing hot and off, that means the plate is still hot from the last time you used it. If you're getting it straight from the cupboard, you should not see this. As soon as you do this, it should start blinking on and off. As soon as it stops blinking, that's when you know it's at 400 degrees. Next, using your glove, put the crucible on top of the hot plate. Before you start the first heating, make sure that somebody has some way to track it so that way it's 15 minutes long. As soon as you put the crucible on top of the hot plate, observe how the blue chips slowly seem to turn white. Only observe for a few seconds at a time and never keep your face over the crucible for too long. Every minute or two, you should stir the crucible with your stir rod to make sure that all the copper 2 sulfate gets heated equally. After 15 minutes, take the crucible off the hot plate with your glove on and place it on the table next to you. In order to find out if the crucible is cool enough to put on the scale, put your hands over the crucible to feel for the heat. Then after that, gently touch the crucible. When you can grasp it with your whole hand without it burning you, that's when you can mass it. The second heating should go just like the first. Take the crucible and put it on the hot plate, then start the timer for 15 minutes. Then you have to stir the crucible every couple of minutes to make sure that the heat is evenly distributed. After the 15 minutes are up, do the second measuring of the crucible, making sure to use the same procedure to make sure that the crucible is cool enough to put on the scale. With the third heating, make sure to thoroughly stir the copper 2 sulfate so that way the heat is evenly distributed. As soon as you are done with the third heating, take the crucible off of the hot plate with the glove on. Then turn the dial to 0. As soon as you turn the dial to 0, the hot off should start blinking on the display. When the hot off stops blinking, that's when you know that it is safe to unplug the hot plate and put it back in the cupboard. As soon as you have masked the crucible for the third time, take the measurement down, write it in your notebook, then you must safely dispose of the copper 2 sulfate. To safely dispose of the copper 2 sulfate, take the crucible and tap it on top of a 100 milliliter beaker. As soon as most of the copper 2 sulfate has left the beaker, get a paper towel and gently brush all the rest of the copper 2 sulfate out of the crucible into the beaker. Then throw the copper 2 sulfate that is in the beaker in the trash. After you are done cleaning up the rest of the materials, you should have all of the information that you need, which includes the weight of the crucible, the initial weight of the copper 2 sulfate, the weight after the first heating, the weight after the second heating, and the final weight after the third heating. With all this information recorded in your notebook, you need to find out the weight loss in the experiment by the copper 2 sulfate, the moles of water lost during the experiment, and the degree of hydration of the copper 2 sulfate.